welcome to a quick chat with the Unemployed Alcoholic. Who am I talking to?
This is Whitney Wasson in Chicago, Illinois.
Well, hey, Whitney.
Hi.
And who is Whitney Wasson?
Good question. I feel like I'm still figuring that out on a daily basis. I am a stand-up comedian. I'm an illustrator. I'm a writer. And I'm also a sober person.
Ah,
I've been in Chicago now. I'm coming up on my 5-year anniversary of being here.
being in Chicago or being sober?
Well, 4 years for sobriety and then 5 years for being in Chicago. So I had a first wild year here.
Which was harder, becoming a Chicagoan? What is it?
Chicagoan.
A Chicagoan. Which was harder, becoming a Chicagoan or becoming sober?
You know, I moved here for the bars for sure. So I feel like the sober part was more difficult. But, I'm from Arkansas originally. So it was a bit of a culture shock to move to this very cold Midwestern city.
Wow, how was that transition going from Arkansas to Chicago?
It was interesting. I grew up in Fort Smith, Arkansas, which is not a small town. It's one of the bigger cities in Arkansas, but it still has a very small town vibe. Everybody knows everybody. Like, you can pretty much learn someone's whole life by just being like, "Oh, where did you go to junior high or where'd you go to high school?" Like it's very kind of claustrophobic and repressive. So I lived there for a while. I lived in Fayetteville, Arkansas, which is a bigger college town. And then I lived in Memphis, Tennessee for a little bit. So I sort of hopped around and toured the South, literally as a comic. But I decided to move here for all of the open mic opportunities and club opportunities, and basically just sort of up my game in comedy. So I visited a couple times before I moved, but actually like uprooting from the place where you've spent your whole life and, moving all your stuff and moving away from friends and family. There was an adjustment period. It was funny when I moved, it was 115 in Arkansas. It was a really hot summer. And when I moved to Chicago, I thought like, oh, there's snow. It's going to be cold. It was like 100 degrees here. So I felt sort of cheated. I was like, I thought that I had just escaped all that humidity. But yeah, I don't know. I love Chicago. Even now in the shutdown, it's still just such an interesting, big place to live in. So despite all the setbacks, pretty happy with my 5 years here.
Cool. And now you described Arkansas as claustrophobic and repressive.
Yep.
What does that mean?
Well, are you're from the Midwest originally, right?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, it's I would just say that there's more going on. In Fort Smith, I joke that one of the most exciting events that would happen in the city was an event called Fire Truck at the Library,
Okay.
which is where they park a fire truck at the library and you can go touch it.
Wow.
Like that's a big event, and there's stuff like Civil War reenactors and Heritage Days and tractor pulls, and there's a lot that's interesting about living in that city in particular. It was one of the last stop before what was formerly called Indian Territory, Oklahoma.
hmm
So it's an interesting little spot, like kind of a seedy history, but just living in your hometown for a long time, like there's just a push to fit in or a push to subscribe to some sort of American dream. I wasn't raised particularly religious, but I would still say that kind of Christian, puritanical, evangelical thinking was the norm, where I grew up. So if you didn't really fit into a box, there was a lot of pushback, both from authority figures and just kind of everybody in town. I feel like I definitely hung out with the weirdos, and there was some, judgment towards that.
Some judgment?
Yeah, like if your goal wasn't to have the little house and the marriage and the white picket fence and work at the factory like your dad did, there was some pushback. People didn't really get the art life there.
I see, and I know you described yourself as a comedian, a writer, and an illustrator, so obviously creativity is very important to you.
Mhm. Yeah, and I came from very creative people. My dad's a historian and my mom is a magazine publisher. So they're both, artsy people, but I would say that a lot of times I felt like they were the outliers in kind of a sea of people wanting to fit in. My dad's quote that I always mention is it's hard to be different in a town called Smith. You know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Like we sort of stuck out and my parents still do, which I'm proud of, but it's a very sort of like the word tradition and heritage was thrown around a lot, and I always felt ugh about that.
Tradition and heritage, how does that contrast with Chicago and city life?
Well, city life is pretty interesting. I feel like your whole life style and what you're like sort of depends on what neighborhood you're in. I think there's like 4 million-ish people in Chicago, and depending on what you want to do, you could just have a totally different experience. There's a lot of Arkansans who moved here. Actually, I moved here with another comedian, and it's pretty wild even as far as comedy goes. You could be someone who entirely works the clubs, or you could be someone who is always going to every single open mic regardless of where it is in the city. And unfortunately there's still kind of a division between the north and the south side as far as comedy scenes. Your whole experience could just be wildly different from somebody that you moved here with. I always said that my biggest problem with Chicago is trying to decide what to do. Now, bear in mind that was before the pandemic shut everything
Right, right.
down, but pre-COVID, it was pretty wonderful. Like my favorite thing to do would just be to get on the bus and ride all the way to the museums and just walk around like in the free museums and look at world-class art. I like to go to the I say liked, I guess. Now it's past tense, it's not open, but I like to go to the conservatory at the Lincoln Park Zoo and just walk around in all the greenhouses and just be like, I escaped. you know,
It sounds like freedom is really important to you.
it really is. And, I started out as a road comic in the South, so I would get in my terrible rusted Lincoln and drive all over to do shows. When I first started in Fayetteville, there was only one open mic. And so I would have to do stuff like events that were poetry readings or variety shows or things like that just to sort of be able to perform and up my chops. It was really exciting to leave my car back home, which I decided was the best decision. I wasn't sure if it was going to make the trip, but it's exciting to be able to move to a place where I could just get on a bus or a train and go wherever I want to. Like whenever people ask about what's the best thing of living here, I say like, well, the autonomy. You can buy, as long as you have a bus pass, you can find something to do. Usually something that's like enriching and positive and exciting.
Enriching and positive and exciting, huh?
Well, compared to my drinking and drugging life, which was whatever the opposite of that is. So you can also get on the bus and train and find a lot of trouble too, which I did in my first year.
Yeah, yeah. So how was that transition, going from partying in a place with just unlimited options to trying to find more productive uses of your time and energy?
It was interesting. It's easy to say that like I drank really hard in my first year here and then had to quit, but to be honest, there had been a history since I was a teenager of me drinking and partying too much, and moving to Chicago was just kind of leveling up with that. So I had sort of cleaned up a little bit before I moved because I just knew that like the nature of uprooting and moving to the big city, like I needed to like kind of be aware of the dangers of that. So I tried to like get it together a little bit, but then I moved and I got comfortable and I sort of got back into my old ways of just I don't know, like I was every kind of drinker. Like I was someone who would pregame in the morning when there wasn't anything to pregame for. I was someone who would be at the bars until they closed. And then I would usually, either before and after events, come home and drink. It was just kind of my coping mechanism for being stressed. And at the time when I first moved here, I worked in theater. And I was working for a theater that has since closed, but was having a lot of problems. The artistic director had been killed in a car accident shortly before I started working there. And that was like just before the new season was starting. So it was just a really fraught time. in theater, just like in comedy, it's a subculture of drinking, you know.
Yeah.
We use art as an excuse to, you know, facilitate like the drug and booze intake. But basically, you know, things just kept getting worse and worse. And if I was able to quit for like a week, then I would binge even harder after that. You know, I was just like every textbook alcoholic thing you can think of, you know, like breaking promises, being late for stuff, just kind of being in risky situations. And I had done that for years in Arkansas and like in briefly in Memphis when I lived there. But leveling up to the city, you know, it's dangerous. Like there were times when I was really drunk on the train platform and you know, I got a cab home and I would just have to like retrace my steps by looking at Instagram and Snapchat, which is really sad, but it was also just like, oh God, what did I tweet yesterday? And so
That had to be really scary for you at that time.
it was, and you know, I look back on it now and I'm just like mortified that I was so unsafe in such a already dicey place. You know, Chicago is big and there can be some really bad consequences, you know. Like I think about like what if I had been put in jail and like what if I didn't have my cell phone and you know, all these things that like as a sober person you look back and you're just like, "Oh my god, what a mess."
And at the time, were you aware of those risks?
Sort of. But, you know, I mean, that's the problem with just being professionally out of it from drinking and drugs. You don't really think about the consequences until you have some, or that's how I was anyway. I really don't think that I saw the scope of the danger until I was actually in it. I had a particularly rough night. Nothing really groundbreaking happened. Just, you know, one of those nights where it was a perfectly okay time and I made it a really bad time. And so
Yeah.
I woke up the next day and just thought, you know what? I think I'm done. I was 29. I was just about to turn 30. And I had always had this kind of vague notion that I would quit in my 30s, which normal non alcoholic people don't think about, I don't think, you know, having to retire. So I'm very fortunate that when I decided that I wanted to be done, I was done. I'm really lucky to have continuous sobriety. And I think that that's because I clicked in with some really healthy people who had some new ideas, you know, and not being a mess was a new idea for me.
Yeah. As you know, sobriety is a part of my story as well.
Mhm.
And I can relate with a lot of what you're saying there. Looking back, it's like, oh my goodness, I wasn't even conscious of how what I was doing was impacting the people around me
Yeah.
and the danger I was putting myself in.
Yeah.
That's dangerous. That's scary to think back on. I can hear the
Mhm.
emotion in your voice as you talk about it.
Mhm.
And I got to tell you, Whitney, I'm proud of you for your sobriety. I think that's incredible. I'm proud of you for the way that you express yourself creatively. I've heard your comedy chops,
Aw.
and you're funny. You're funny, but you've also got a compassion about you. You know, I've seen you in environments with people around, some with the same mindset as you, some with different, and you have a consistent acceptance of people and a love towards people that's truly incredible. So
Aw, thanks.
I think that's really cool, and that's something that you should be proud of your sobriety, and again, who you've become with sobriety, still maintaining your creativity. Was that a concern for you as far as possibly losing that creative spark if you stepped away from alcohol?
Yeah, it really was. I don't know if you felt that way too, but I was someone who always wrote drunk, you know, not just with stand up, like everything. Like since I had been a big time drinker since I was a teenager, I had that what I now see as a wrong-headed idea that somehow the substance use was tied with creativity. And I've heard a lot of people say that too, you know, that they think that they're a good artist because they're a mess. And now that idea is really offensive to me because I think it keeps people in kind of a cycle of getting messed up. And I've lost a lot of people, and I just constantly think about like, what kind of stuff would they be making now, you know? So I was really afraid of it, particularly with stand up, because you know, as you know, you have to be in bars so much, even if you're not like there to perform. You know, it's important to go hang out. It's important to meet people and support your friends and support you know the kind of shows that you want to keep in business. And obviously things have changed now, but at the time I just sort of thought, okay, well, I can't lose this comedy thing, you know, that's what I moved here for. So it was tough, but I had to really quickly adapt. And, for me, that meant showing up early to scope things out, getting a Coke and a lime, like step one, just so that I wouldn't be tempted to like go to the bar again. And so nobody would, ask if they could buy me a drink. Which, that was just another facet of being in that world so much. Like all my friends and people that I like hung out with socially, like they were bartenders, bouncers, like comedians, musicians. Like we just live at bars. And I've been fortunate to meet a lot more sober artists. And, I wound up doing a sober show that you were on. So I really had to just sort of start at step one and be like, okay, what do I have to not do to still exist here? And for me, just taking away drugs and alcohol was, the first step. Step one, be sober. Step two, see how the rest goes. So I was terrified, and I did a couple of months worth of shows where I was just shaking and terrible. And I had to kind of tell my friends like, hey, I'm still in the thick of getting over this, so this isn't going to be the best performance. But I was also like pretty willing to talk about it just because it was so important to me to keep it.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds like you put a lot of thought and effort into creating some boundaries and safeguards.
Absolutely.
So, what is it about the environment of stand up or the environment of theater that makes it worth the risk to, go into a potential place of possible relapse and still engage?
Yeah, I got a lot of mistrust from my early sober folks for even being someone who wanted to, be back in that environment. I talked to a lot of newly sober people, and they're like, "Oh, I don't, I think maybe I'll go to a bar like after my first year and give it a shot." And, I think I sort of wore it as a point of pride that I was like, "Nah, I'm in bars 6 nights a week,"
Hmm.
because I needed some sort of armor to be like, "No, I'm going to keep doing this." But, I talked about my hometown being kind of a boring, cultureless place. And I think that it is getting better. Like I think there are a lot of young people kind of shaking things up. But one of the things that kind of kept me interested and engaged as a young person was live performance. I didn't get into theater until I went to college. And then I stuck with that for a long time. I have a BA in theater from the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. But live performance is unlike anything else. Like you can watch a movie and you can have a big emotion, and that can be shared with other people if you're in a theater, or you can talk with people about it afterwards, or you can like listen to a new album at home. But being there for the comedy or a play or music, like that's a different experience. It's such a visceral thing.
It sounds like you really found yourself or found your opportunity to express yourself through performance.
Yeah, I did. And I feel like I'm not I don't know how to say it. I feel like I'm not the best comic ever, but I feel like I can absolutely throw down when I need to. And I feel like that came from coming up in kind of rough bars where they didn't know that comedy was happening. You know what I mean? Or you get to a show or you get to a bar and you're like, hey, I'm here for the show tonight. And the bartender's like, what are you talking about? And so you have to like battle your way. But yeah, no, I just, it's such a unique thing. And, if I really want to wax poetic about stand up, like, it's kind of the oldest, simplest kind of art. It's one person with a microphone or not, hopefully saying something that's true, or if it's not true, it seems like it. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
same way that I admire like long distance runners or singers, like a long distance runner or like an opera singer, like all they've got is their instrument and they can just do it. And I feel like the best stand-up comedians, like you see them on stage and you're just like, how are they doing that? Like, how can one person get on stage and captivate a whole room of people, where you could hear a pin drop and they're being funny and you like them or you hate them, either way, like depending on what they do. It's such a special thing. And, even when stuff is really hard, like we've had to turn to Zoom shows in the pandemic, which is not ideal, but even with Zoom shows, like I can turn it on and like watch a person try and connect through humor.
Sounds like connecting with people is very important to you.
Yeah, I mean it's how we survive, right? Like I've been quarantining since the first week of March, and
Wow.
it's now July. Oh my gosh, it's July. And so it's been difficult to kind of find human connection, but I still feel like stand up is a great way to do it, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Well, this has been really good to get to know you a bit. I feel like we've barely scratched the surface. Hopefully, we can get into it a little bit more as far as who Whitney Wasson is, and I would also love to know what's going well in your life and some things that you might be struggling with. Thanks for hanging around, and we're going to take a quick break. Thank you all for listening. We'll be right back with more from Whitney Wasson. Welcome back to a quick chat with the Unemployed Alcoholic, and I'm here with my guest Whitney Wasson, and we're hanging out, getting to know her a little bit. Whitney, thanks for being here. Quick question for you with probably a longer answer. What is one thing that's going well in your life right now?
Well, I would say that in this pandemic, that's been going on for what feels like 7 years now, I haven't been able to go out and do comedy like I used to. Every facet of my life has changed really. Like I moved to this city where previously I could go anywhere I want to and I love that autonomy. To now I pretty much have to be home. I live in like the biggest community by capita in Chicago, so there's just a ton of people here. So one of the things that I've been doing to cope with being inside is drawing a webcomic called Sober Rabbit.
Aha, I've seen that. I think that is super cool.
Oh, thanks. And it's even weirder, like I'm a lightly spiritual person, but I would say that if the universe wanted me to like focus on art, they went about it in a pretty interesting way. I started doing the comic last October just as something to sort of like not be stand up and not be work, just sort of blow off steam because I feel like there's a lot of art and movies and music about getting sober, like what somebody's rock bottom is.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that there's a lot of art about what it's like to stay sober.
Hmm.
And that's kind of what the comic is about. Like, okay, you did the big thing, like you changed your life, and now what's that like day to day? So I started the comic just to sort of blow off steam. And then a few weeks later, I was crossing the street to go to a show, and out of nowhere, I was hit by a car.
Oh,
Yeah, I was just like crossing the street, like totally normal day, nothing was going on. And a driver, I think, was in a hurry and wasn't paying attention, blew through two lights, hit me mid crosswalk. And luckily, I wasn't put over the hood. I was sort of like knocked under and out of the way. But it broke my foot. I was out of commission for stand up for a couple months, and I'm still actually recovering from those injuries. I'm much better. Like, I'm so lucky that, it wasn't worse. But in that time, all I could do was sit on my couch. So that really helped me in a weird way get over losing all those shows. And I wound up losing a new job because I couldn't physically stand to do it. So I've been making comics, hardcore since October. And I'm very proud of the work I've done. And I've actually met like a whole new group of sober people who are artists like through doing that. So I put out a new comic every Friday on Instagram. And it's exciting to me. It's a new way to kind of express what it's like to go through recovery and also, do it through humor and, kind of have fun with it.
yeah, yeah. It's always amazing to me when I hear people tell stories about what's going well in their life. So often, just like with your story, it comes out of kind of a dark or painful time.
Yeah, something bad happened first.
Right, right. You get hit by a car, and it opens up the opportunity for you to develop this comic. So,
Yeah,
wow.
totally.
Wow, yeah, that's so. I know I've seen a couple of these the comics that you put out, and again, I think they're just really cute. They're simple.
Mhm.
They're easy to digest, and
Mhm.
just get just this little dopamine shot of joy.
Yeah, exactly. That's totally my goal. I think, I don't know if it's directly related to substance problems or just mental illness as well, but I was very shy about putting my art out for years. Like every now and then I would post something that I drew and get a couple likes and feel like, okay, cool. but I was really nervous about putting out anything long form. Like, as you can see, just like scrolling through Instagram, like some of the most talented artists are out there putting out stuff daily, and I
Yeah.
wasn't someone who really learned how to color digitally or learned how to like really, kill it in Photoshop. Like, I'm a very sort of pen and ink kind of person. So part of getting sober, for me has been getting more confident and just sort of accepting where I'm at.
Mhm.
And so something that I really like strive for with the comic is just draw it and put it out there. I draw most of the comics on my phone with my finger. So I draw a little comic in my phone, and the art is very simple. So I draw the little comic, and then I make sure the panels are lined up right, and then I pop it on Instagram. And I'm just like, okay, it's out there, it's done. And like in the past, I would have just agonized over like it must be perfect. It has to be colored beautifully, no stray marks. And now I'm just like, I don't care. I just want people to like have a fun thing, and I enjoy drawing it. So it's not about perfection anymore.
Boy, yeah, and there is a lot of wisdom in what you just said there, a lot of life lessons. I know I find that when I start comparing myself to other people, I'll always measure myself short.
Mhm.
I'll always be able to, if I look at the whole world, I'll always be able to find something that see is better, something that's
Exactly.
more difficult to produce, something like that.
Mhm.
But other people don't see it the same way.
Yeah,
Other people can get joy out of the little things that we produce. And I commend you for that. I commend you for overcoming that fear and putting stuff out into the world. And then the other thing that comes to mind there is, of course, the Serenity Prayer, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
I am.
God grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Yep.
We can control some of the things in that equation that you just laid out,
Mhm.
and some of the things we can't. We can control what we put out into the world, what art we publish,
Mhm.
but we can't control how people respond to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
If we just have the serenity to accept whatever people have to say about what we produce, what we put out there, or what kind of job we're doing, that'll give us the courage to be able to actually do it.
Totally.
Yeah. So, Whitney, what is one thing that you're struggling with?
Um, I would just give the obvious answer and say that I'm still struggling with how my life has changed because of COVID.
Yeah.
I've been very fortunate to have not lost too many people. My husband did have a death in his family pretty much as soon as the pandemic hit. It's scary. So I'm lucky that no one in my immediate orbit has died. I have some friends who are sick, and now that my husband is back out in the workforce after a leave from his job, I'm pretty freaked out about that.
Yeah.
But like just like you said, like there are things that you control, and there's things that you have no control over. So it's been an adjustment, to be kind of sequestered in my little studio apartment, and seeing people like walk by without wearing masks and seeing how that sort of issue has been politicized. It's really tough because people are dying from it, and my lifestyle of like running out to do comedy and to go to art shows and all of that has been changed a lot. I also related to the whole car hitting me thing. My medical care was on hold for like 2 months because nothing was open. So
Mhm.
just the sort of, at this point I joke that like the car hitting me was tough, and my foot still being broken is tough, but the paperwork involved in medical stuff is intense. So, I've gone to like 5 or 6 different doctors. I was working with a lawyer. Like it's all just been kind of a nightmare of paperwork on top of being someone who is very active who now has limited mobility. And the other thing that I just agonize over, if I'm being really shallow here, I was supposed to have my first out of town headlining gig at a club.
Yeah.
Uh, I was going to be in Detroit for a weekend, the last week of March,
Yeah.
and so it was really tough to be like, okay, I got hit by a car, I lost my job, now there's a pandemic, and I can't headline. And like obviously, like in the greater scheme of things, that's not the most important, and that date has been rescheduled. But it's just really rough to be like, oh man, things are hard. things are harder. Oh my gosh, like a pandemic? Like who could have known? So, I just keep joking that like if the universe is trying to give me a signal to like calm down and work on myself, like I get it. I'm good. Like thank you. We're good.
Oh yeah. Yeah, this is a tough time. And it seems like, wow, it seems like things aren't getting better. You know, it's a depressing time for me,
Yeah.
and it's hard. You know, and those things that you talk about, like the first headlining gig, January and February in my comedy career, I just had a bunch of great things get lined up, and
Mhm.
multiple shows, and turn the corner to profitability, which is a really
Yeah,
difficult thing to
huge.
do, and then the world closed,
Mhm.
and I mean, I'm fine. My situation is okay relative to many other people's.
Yeah.
And then thinking about how that makes me feel, that I feel bad about my situation when other people are in so much of a worse position.
Yeah.
That's even more depressing, you know.
Yeah.
It's tough. And then you touched on another thing there, the division that's in this
Mhm.
country right now. It's heartbreaking,
Yeah.
just to see people go at each other, without an empathy, without a desire to understand another person's perspective, but with
Right.
aggression. And it's, frankly, it's terrifying to me.
It is, and I feel like what I struggle with a lot at this point, like as of this week, is generally agreeing with people, like generally agreeing like with their politics and values and that sort of thing, but then just still like a lot of fighting and a lot of like, social media can just like amplify so much, like you see like on Twitter every day there's some sort of new fight, and I just want to be like, you two agree with each other. Like in the greater scheme of things, you agree. Like there
Yeah.
shouldn't be this fight. But yeah, just in a weird way, it helps me to hear other people like just articulate that and say, like, yeah, this is rough because just the weight of it. Like people talk about how Zoom fatigue, is
Hmm.
a real
Hmm.
thing. And so it's like even that new coping mechanism that we had in March, like by July is sort of like not as effective maybe, and we're constantly having to try and find ways to self-soothe in healthy ways,
Yeah.
which is tough for people with mental illness and substance addiction. I just read yesterday in Chicago that the opioid overdose rate is like so high compared to last year. So
Yeah.
many people are dying, and it's disproportionately people who are working class and who are not white and who just don't have the resources, that I could walk out my door here in Lakeview
Yeah.
and get, so it's there's the whole world having trouble, and then there's like the sort of regional, like what's my comedy scene doing, and then there's the personal, like how is my family adapting, like are my friends getting along, like it's just a lot to take in.
It is, and I've found myself with kind of a negative or pessimistic outlook as far as like what this is going to mean to our country. How these things are all going to settle and shake out. I've got kind of a pessimistic outlook on that, but I have a very optimistic outlook about people. I think we as people are resilient.
Hmm.
I think when we look at things from other people's perspective, we have an incredible ability to forgive and move forward, and
Hmm.
be able to embrace each other's struggles, and I really think that we're going to see that. I don't know when,
I know.
but I think we're going to see the absolute best of humanity as we go through kind of a dark time.
Yeah. Yeah, I see that too. I get a lot of strength from I've gotten to meet a lot of people who are getting sober for the first time, like right now, just sort of on account of how rough things have been. And now, you're at home and you sort of have to face your demons. And it's been really impressive to see people get sober somewhat on their own, not alone by any means, but like being able to reach out online and sort of like call people. And, it's been very encouraging to see people step up and say, I know what you're going through. Like, I can help you. Like, this isn't a thing that's, this isn't a lost cause. Like, just because you're stuck at home, like
Yeah.
you can have a healthier life. So it's just mind boggling to me because I required so much in-person attention when I got sober. Like, I was hitting my friends up for coffee dates like all the time just to be like, how do I process human feelings? Like,
Yep.
I'm sad. What do I do about that? So the fact that people are able to kind of reach out through the internet and get help is so encouraging to me. And I'm so proud of anybody who may be listening who's dealing with that right now. Like, kudos to you, keep it up. It's
Yeah.
tough.
Yeah. You mentioned pick up the phone and call.
Mhm.
I can speak to the fact that I've been in the same position as some of your friends. Actually, I've been in both
Yeah.
of those positions, but I've been in the position where people have called me that are in need of support and help.
Yeah.
And we love it when the phone rings.
Mhm.
We love it when somebody reaches out and says, I'm struggling. I need to connect. Will you help me? That connection is very important. And on the flip side, when I'm the one dialing the phone,
Mhm.
it always feels like I'm going to be intrusive. I'm going to interrupt something. They're not going to want to hear from me. Those are the
Right.
games that go through my head. But as somebody who's been on the other side of the phone, none of that's true. We want to hear from you so badly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, I'm on the 20th, so it's the 15th now. On the 20th, I will be 3 years, 11 months sober, which is
Congratulations again.
crazy.
Yeah,
Thank you. And so I keep joking on my Zoom shows. I keep saying that if I don't panic and drink the Listerine, I will have 4 years in August. But it's nice to have to be able to count time like that, and be able to talk to newly sober people and be like, hey, the way you feel now, like, I completely get it. And I'm someone who never thought that I would get sober,
yeah,
ever. Not even like, my ideas of maybe I'll get sober in my 30s. Like, that it didn't seem real.
right,
Like,
right.
I didn't know that I would live to be 33. And so that's a nice part that kind of keeps me upbeat, to just be like, well, sometimes you're making progress in ways that you wouldn't even notice because you're having a better life.
Yeah, yeah. Talking about that, picking up the phone and talking to people, I would even take that a step further. And some of these two-dimensional Facebook arguments where people are posting back and forth and things like that, maybe try to work that into a longer form conversation.
Yeah.
Instead of shouting for a tenth of a second online, maybe try to find somebody that we disagree with and have a
Yeah.
conversation. Because, boy, it seems like political views and opinions on various things, all of that is secondary to us being people. Yeah, that's actually part of why I've started this podcast, is just to have a quick chat. Sit down with people and just talk for a little while about who they are, about what's going well, and what we might be struggling with, because those things are common across the board. We all are somebody. We all are struggling with something, and we all have things that are going well. And boy, if we can come together as a people, I think that will pay dividends, and that's where we'll see humanity shine. That's where we'll see some great and wonderful things. So, on that, Whitney, if people want to hear more from you, if people want to connect with the Sober Rabbit, if people want to get a hold of you, how can people reach you?
Sure. I'm very findable online, I think. My website, which has links to everything, is Whitney Wasson, and that's WASSON.com. So thewhitneywasson.com. I publish Sober Rabbit on Fridays, usually Friday mornings. And you can find Sober Rabbit either on my website or by going to Instagram.com/Sober Rabbit. And to take it a step further, if you love my art and you love possums and rabbits and despair and all the things that I draw, I also have a Patreon account. So I put out coloring pages every week for a certain tier. I put out extra comics, journal comics. People who are subscribed to my Patreon are the first people to get new merch when it comes out. And I have a threadless shop for my art where you can buy t-shirts, magnets, phone cases, blankets, all sorts of stuff with cute bunnies on them at soberrabbit.threadless.com.
All right.
So,
Very, very
yeah.
cool. I'm so glad to chat with you, Whitney. It's always a pleasure every time we connect. I've enjoyed your comedy. I've enjoyed your story of sobriety. I've enjoyed seeing you connect with people and support people. Good things are happening, and they'll continue happening for you.
Yeah, thanks for being such a positive person in comedy. There's not a lot of us, so I really appreciate it.
I am the Unemployed Alcoholic, and this has been a quick chat with the Unemployed Alcoholic. Thank you all so very much for listening. If you ever want to reach me, the best ways to do so is my website, theunemployedalcoholic.com. And just go there, take a peek, look around, because there's just a ton of content and stuff and great things on that website for you. You can also connect with me through email on that website as well. So thanks for being you. Have a great day.
You nailed it.
Okay, good.